amen, amen. So some of you who kind of hang out here a lot might have heard the beginning of this childhood story of mine before. And this Torah portion is reminding me a little bit. You see, apparently when I was younger, I didn't always tell the truth. I don't know if I realized that I didn't always tell the truth. Well, that's not true. I totally knew I wasn't telling the truth. And I don't think my mom really cared if I wasn't telling her the truth, because somehow my mom always knew when I wasn't telling the truth. But if she really wanted me to tell the truth, she would say, you have to say Fred, don't call me Freddie. She would, that was a slip. It's my medicine. She would say to me, say on Hashem's name, which is a little silly in English because Hashem literally is the name, like Har HaShem, mountain of God. God is often referred to as Hashem in Jewish tradition. And my mom was a Reformed Jewish traditionalist, and she wanted me to learn that this was really important. You can't lie if you're going to say on Hashem's name. And once I tested it out, and I was terrified all day. I knew something bad, but nothing bad happened. But I knew like something still was wrong. There's something powerful for our ancients and for a lot of people today to think about Hashem, God's name. In fact, you weren't even able to say God's name, real name. I don't mean like Adonai. I don't mean Hashem. I don't mean all of these other terms we use for God. Once upon a time, God's name was spelled with 4 letters in Hebrew, a yud, a hey, a vav, and a hey. We have no idea how to say it. And the only person who did was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who would say it on the holiest day, which was Yom Kippur, in the holiest place inside the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was. And the rest of the folk would tie a rope to his leg because you come so close to God by saying God's name. It was dangerous. Nobody else could be there. In case he got zapped, they'd have to be able to pull him out. Saying God's name at the wrong time, our ancients believed was dangerous. It was dangerous. And at the end of this Torah portion, we have this really strange scenario that we have given to no child who became B'nai Mitzvah ever. And in this section, it says that there is a person, we only know of him as a ben, as a son, probably a child or a youth or a young person. We see this ben who has an Egyptian father and an Israelite mother. And at some point, he gets into a fight with another Israelite, and this son, this Ben, who has an Egyptian father and an Israelite mother, and we know the mother's name. We know the mother's name. So Shlomit, and we see this encounter where after this fight, this young person probably, we don't know, but this individual says God's name and then is brought to Moses because there has to be a punishment for this act of blasphemy. This is where you and I get a little uncomfortable. And while they're waiting, he's secluded, and eventually he's going to be executed for this act of blasphemy, which is why we don't give this section to B'nai Mitzvah kids to read. How am I going to explain this? It makes us so uncomfortable. Is it just to say that, okay, in the ancient world, blasphemy was saying God's name, and that's a no-no, but that doesn't really apply to us because we don't know God's name, and that's good enough? I think we could do better than that. We have a couple of hints of another way to read this. Our rabbis, by the way, are not kind at all to this individual or to his mother. They really kind of take them to task. the boy, the young person, the man, we don't know, for being a blasphemer. And the mother, Shlomit, because she would say shalom to everyone. So she was kind of like a flirt and really frowned upon by the rabbinic texts. It's kind of ugly. So I want to give you an alternative. In the Sifra, which is a rabbinic commentary, a midrash really, tells stories to try and explain things that the Torah, it's not clear about. And in the Sifra, this commentary in the book of Leviticus, it says that this person with the Egyptian father and the Israelite mother, he wanted to go where his mother's tribe was, the tribe of Dan. And he wanted to pitch his tent where everybody else in the tribe of Dan was. And they said no, and they kicked him out. And he was so angry about it, he became hateful of God and everything to do with the Israelites. Put a pin in that. There's another part of it that was interesting, and that is the father is an Egyptian and the mother is an Israelite. And without the text telling us, we know that these ancient Israelites, certainly in this section of Leviticus, they were the ones who were the slaves not so long ago. Could this be an act of violence against this woman by an Egyptian slave master? Could it be another act of abuse that we see for people who are enslaved? So this person, and since it uses the word ben and not another term, it makes me think that he's a kid. It's a young person. And forgive me, for me as a kid, is anybody like 25 and under? 30. Yeah. And so now we have a new possibility of what this might mean. I was having a conversation with someone in the synagogue just right before COVID. It was a few years ago, about how people in the Jewish community can feel wounded by others in the Jewish community. That there are times when people in our own community, like the story about the tribe of Dan saying to this person, you can't be here because you're only half Israelite, that people can alienate folks from community with their actions, leaving them with a trauma. You know, there's going to be a biography about George Floyd that's about to come out. And I learned on NPR, because I don't think the book is out yet, things that I didn't understand before. He made his mistakes. He had troubles with the law, lots of different kinds of things. Sure. But overall, this biographer is saying that he would go into a room and make sure with a big smile he would shake everybody's hand because he is a black man who's 6'6". So just by showing up, he's kind of a threat. And so he learned to go around and be like gregarious and kind and shake people's hands. And I wonder if that experience, or the experience of somebody else being kind of pushed out, even unintentionally, from community, is going to be this person who after a fight is going to say God's name and is going to be called a blasphemer, rather than us having some empathy, compassion, an ability to accompany this person and say, what's hurting you? Why? Do you have to confront things and pay for our crimes? Sure, I'm held accountable. I know you hold me accountable. The Reformed Rabbinate is going to hold me accountable. Lots of folks hold me accountable. My kids, my neighbors. That's okay to be held accountable. I'm all for it. But what's going to drive some people who have been wounded, and what do they do with community? How do they have encounters with other people? what could we look at this Ben Yisraelit, where most translations are going to say half Israelite, but that's not what the Hebrew is. That's our translators already going further into saying, you're a little bit less, dude. I never looked at this before. Wendy Zieler is a professor. There we go. At the Reform Movement Seminary, who actually became an Orthodox rabbi. Yes, her name is Wendy, a woman who became an Orthodox rabbi, which is something that can happen in more recent years. She made this commentary because as a professor engaged in feminist Jewish thought, we get to encounter the Torah differently. If we're going to say this matters, we have to find a way to make sure that it matters. And not just say, oh, it's ancient times. Let's just kind of negate it, and that's why I don't like organized religion. We're going to just leave the blasphemers. We don't buy into that. I think we can take away a truth. And the truth is, there are actions that even good people can engage in that are going to leave its mark. And we, as people who believe in a tent that's going to be open on all sides, ready to accept anybody to come in, we have to be prepared that we also miss the mark. No matter what the institution is, certainly Congregation Har HaShem, God's mountain, not Sinai, here, we've done it too. And so, maybe my mom was onto something when she said, when something is really important, you have to say on Hashem's name. If we could remember about what we do or how we're going to say something a little bit before we say it, who would like to be able to do that better? Right? Some of, half up. I think there's a truth here, and it's not just about somebody being executed in ancient times for committing an act of blasphemy. I think instead, we can think about who was that Ben Yisraelit, the unnamed person whose mom was Shlomit, and where did he come from? A single mom who had hard times, who was kept out of any circle. He couldn't go back to Egypt. He couldn't hang out with the tribe of Dan. Sound familiar? And now, what are we going to do about that? We could talk more about it later. Aleinu l'shabech, 586 in the Siddur. We invite you to rise.